Vienna, 1907. Just as the bells of St. Stephen's Cathedral tolled the hour of 6, and the fog rolled low through the alleys behind the Hofburg Palace, Brielle Jameson stood in the archway of the imperial kitchens, her apron stained with beetroot and flour. She was not supposed to be there, certainly not in the service corridors that hugged the wing of the Archduke's private apartments. But the soup had spilled, and Frau Gruber had shouted, and Brielle had run, clutching the pot to her chest until the heat blistered her arms. "Careful," came a voice behind her. "Calm," clipped Austrian German. "Male." She turned fast, nearly dropping the pot. The man standing before her was not dressed like a footman. His coat was black wool, collar turned up, gloved hands resting on the hilt of a saber. His boots were polished to mirror shine despite the mud of the courtyard. "I'm not stealing," Brielle said quickly, breath catching. "I didn't say you were." His eyes were a startling gray, the color of the Danube in winter. "But you're in the wrong place. That door leads to the Archduke's study." "I'm trying to get back to the scullery," she muttered, adjusting her grip on the pot. He stepped closer. "You're American." Her posture stiffened. "So? Nothing," he said, something unreadable flickering across his face. "I just don't hear that accent much in the palace kitchens." She couldn't tell if he was mocking her or not. Before she could answer, a door opened somewhere down the corridor, and a voice called, "Yvain, the duel is still on, yes?" The man exhaled and turned his head. "Yes, Dawn. The parade ground." The other man laughed and vanished. Brielle squinted. "A duel. An idiotic one," Yvain said with a weary smile. "My cousin believes honor is best defended with swords. I believe in quieter methods." "Your nobility," she said, more a statement than a question. He nodded. "Yvain Dekker, Archduke Leopold's aide-de-camp." She stepped back. "I should go." He opened the servant's door beside her. "This leads back to the kitchens." She hesitated, then ducked through. Just before it closed, he said, "Don't let Frau Gruber frighten you too much. She throws pans, but never hard." That night, she found a folded scrap of paper tucked into the hem of her apron. In neat, slanted writing, "If you're ever lost again, I'll be in the east corridor at first bell." Why? The next morning, she wasn't lost, but she went anyway. He was there, leaning against the stone ledge, watching the fog burn off the rooftops. When he saw her, he straightened. "You came." "I had questions," she said simply. "About the duel." He smiled faintly. "My cousin insulted a Hungarian count's sister. I'm the one who has to answer for it." "That's unfair." "It's imperial protocol," he said. "Leopold can't afford a scandal, so I handle the mess." "Why not just apologize?" "Because she liked the insult," he said dryly. "And her brother is a fool." She laughed before she could stop herself. He looked at her, then really looked, and something softened in his face. They met again. And again. Always early, always careful. She brought him stolen apple tarts wrapped in napkins. He told her stories of the court, of the empress's obsession with peacocks and the marble terrace where no one was allowed to step. He never touched her. But once, when she shivered in the courtyard, he unbuttoned his coat and draped it over her shoulders, fingers brushing her sleeve. Her heart stuttered. The kitchens were loud with gossip, but Brielle said nothing. Not about the letters he sometimes left in the laundry basket, or the way he once whispered, "If you were noble-born, I'd court you in the gardens under moonlight." But she wasn't noble-born. She was the daughter of a Baltimore dockhand who died coughing coal dust, and she'd come to Vienna with a promise of work and ended up peeling carrots for Frau Gruber. Then came the night of the duel. It wasn't supposed to be serious honor satisfied with a graze, a scratch. But the Hungarian count came drunk, and his blade was sharp. By the time Brielle heard the news, blood had soaked Yvain's right sleeve, and he was being carried down the palace stairs. She didn't think. She ran through the halls, past servants and guards, into the wing where no kitchen maid had any right to be. She found him in a gilded salon, shirt torn, arm bound with linens, face pale. "You're not supposed to be here," he murmured, eyes fluttering open. "Neither are you," she whispered back, kneeling beside him. "You could have died." He reached for her hand. She let him take it. "I'm being sent away," he said. "South. The Archduke is furious. He says I embarrassed the court." Her throat tightened. "Where?" "Bosnia. Most likely Sarajevo." "That's not fair." "It's imperial protocol," he said again, but his voice cracked. She squeezed his hand. "Take me with you." He laughed, a small, broken sound. You're mad. I have nothing here, she said. You know that. He looked at her like she was something unreal. They'll never let you travel with an officer. Not as a maid, she said. But maybe, as something else. The next morning, she stood before the Archduke himself, summoned by Yvain's request. Her apron was gone. She wore a borrowed gown, her hair braided and pinned. You're American? The Archduke asked, peering down at her. Yes, sir. You've no family here? No, sir. Yvain stood beside her, face unreadable. She saved my life, he said quietly. I owe her everything. The Archduke studied her a long time. Then he said, You'll need a title. My cousin in the Tyrol lost a daughter last year. We'll say you're his niece. The papers will be arranged. She didn't speak. Couldn't. You'll travel as Fräulein Brielle von Lenz, the Archduke continued. And you will be presented at court in Sarajevo as his affianced. Yvain did not flinch. Yes, your grace, he said. As they left the chamber, Brielle whispered, Is this real? Yvain stopped in the corridor, turned to her, and kissed her hand. It is now. And in that moment, it was. The train to Sarajevo rattled through frost-bitten valleys, its windows fogging with every breath. Anneliese, no longer Brielle, not in name, sat across from Yvain in a second-class compartment, wool gloves folded neatly in her lap. Her borrowed velvet coat smelled faintly of lavender and starch. The papers in her satchel bore the wax seal of the Imperial Chancellor, and though she had read them twice, she had not yet dared to believe them. Yvain had spoken little since they boarded in Vienna. He wore his uniform with a quiet gravity, epaulets dulled under the compartment's dim light. His wounded arm rested in a sling, and his right hand absently traced the edge of the window pane. Does it always snow this early in Bosnia? She asked, watching the hills lean into each other beyond the glass. He shifted slightly. It's not unusual. The terrain carries the mountain cold longer than the plains. She nodded, then added, I've never seen mountains like this. You'll see more. The palace sits above the city on a ridge. The view can silence a room. She looked at him then, not the landscape. Do you miss it already? I haven't arrived yet. He didn't elaborate. The train passed a shepherd's hut, its chimney breathing a thin column of smoke into the dusk. Later, when the lamps flickered on and the sky turned the color of blue ink spilled in water, he reached into his satchel and slid a small box across the table. She hesitated before opening it. Inside lay a brooch, shaped like a falcon mid-flight, its wings inlaid with garnets. The clasp was older than either of them, but polished, cared for. It belonged to my mother, he said. She wore it when she was presented at court in Prague. She said it made her feel braver. Anneliese touched the cool metal. I can't accept this. You already have. She wouldn't have wanted. She would have liked you, he said, looking away. She was born in Trieste. Married into nobility, not from it. She closed the box carefully. Did they accept her? Eventually. After enough dinners and enough sons. There was a pause. The wheels of the train clicked like a distant metronome. I'm not sure I'll know what to say when we arrive, she admitted. I don't speak Bosnian. I've never attended a formal reception. I can't dance. You don't need to, he said quietly. You only need to be seen with me. That will be enough. But will it be enough for you? He met her gaze then, his expression unreadable. It already is. Sarajevo greeted them with lantern light and the scent of damp stone. The station was smaller than Vienna's, crowned with Moorish arches and watched by uniformed guards. A covered carriage waited outside, its wheels crunching over thin ice. The palace was not grand in the Habsburg sense, but it stood proud built of pale limestone, with tall windows and Ottoman flourishes that whispered of older empires. Anneliese followed Yvain through the main hall, past frescoes of eagles and saints, her boots echoing on the marble. A woman approached them near the vestibule, older, with olive skin and a silk scarf wound tightly around her hair. She bowed without smiling. This is Zanita, Yvain said. She will help you dress for the reception. Anneliese offered her hand. Zanita took it lightly, then turned without a word and led her through a narrow corridor that opened into a warm chamber lit by a tiled stove and a single oil lamp. The gown laid out on the bed was heavier than anything she'd worn before, gold silk, high-collared, with lace cuffs and a satin sash threaded through with jet beads. Zanita dressed her without speaking. Her hands were quick, but not unkind. Is there a mirror? Anneliese asked softly. Zanita pulled aside a linen curtain. The mirror behind it was clouded with age, but clear enough to show her reflection. Unfamiliar. Too tall on the bodice, too pale, but upright. She touched the falcon brooch pinned at her shoulder and willed herself still. In the reception hall, the chandeliers trembled with the weight of their own light. Musicians played a slow waltz, and men bowed low as she entered on Yvain's arm. The governor's wife, a woman with sharp cheekbones and silver lace gloves, greeted her in French, which Anneliese answered in careful phrases. She understands more than she speaks, Yvain said, never once loosening his grip on her arm. The lie passed unchallenged. At the table, they were served plum brandy and roast lamb, followed by quince tarts dusted with snow sugar. Anneliese kept her back straight and her sentences brief. When a colonel inquired if she'd been to the Adriatic coast, she simply said, "Not yet," and let the conversation turn away. Near the end of the evening, Yvain leaned in and whispered, "You've done well." She didn't answer. Instead, she looked at his hand resting on the tablecloth, the line of his fingers steady even beneath the linen. Slowly, she moved her own hand next to his, not touching, but close enough that the warmth bridged the space between. They sat like that through the final course, as lanterns flickered and the waltz faded into silence. 3 weeks passed before Anneliese was summoned to the palace garden at dusk, a place she had glimpsed only through narrow windows. There was little greenery in winter, but the evergreens stood sentinel, and the air smelled faintly of juniper and soot from the city's chimneys. She walked alone, as instructed, her gloved hands clasped beneath her cloak. The path twisted through low hedges and finally opened onto a terrace bordered by iron railings. There stood a man she had seen once from a distance, Governor General Marivik, appointed by the emperor himself, a man said to favor military logic over social pleasantries. "You are punctual," he said without turning. "I was told to be." He looked over his shoulder. "And practical." She kept her gaze level. "I try to be." He studied her a moment, then motioned to the bench behind him. "Sit." She obeyed. Her heart did not race, but her breath shortened. The brooch at her collar weighed more heavily than usual. "My wife says you speak passable French and understand more German than you let on." "I listen well." "She also says you've not made a single error in protocol since your arrival, that you know when to speak and when to remain silent." "I've had reason to learn." The governor clasped his hands behind his back, considering the fog creeping through the lower gardens. "My wife also tells me you are not who you claim to be." Anneliese's spine straightened, but she said nothing. "She says your vowels betray Baltimore, not Tyrol, and that no niece of Count von Lenz would wear shoes resoled with Sarajevo leather." Still, she did not speak. He waited a long moment. "I find myself unconcerned by this," he said finally. "You've caused no disruption. Yvain's judgment is rarely misplaced." "He told you?" "No." He refused to answer directly, which told me everything. A silence passed. She watched a sparrow dip between the hedges, its wings catching the gray light. "You love him?" the governor asked. "Yes." "And he?" "He doesn't say it, but he shows me. You understand what that means. For him, and for you." "I do." He turned to face her fully. "The emperor's cousin will arrive from Dubrovnik in spring. There will be a formal reception. At that time, your engagement will be expected to proceed." She nodded once. "You will be questioned. Not directly, but in layers. Nobility is fluent in implication." "I'm learning." Yvain is not a man who chooses lightly. He is not sentimental. If he trusts you, then so must I. For now. The governor turned again to the terrace edge, his silhouette stark against the fading sky. "You may go." Anneliese rose and walked back through the hedge paths, the cold pressing against her collar, the brooch warm against her neck. She passed no one, though she heard a lute faintly through an open window. That night, Yvain found her in the library, where she had begun helping to catalog the French and Latin volumes for the house steward. He leaned against the archway, his coat dusted with snow, and said nothing until she looked up. "I met with the governor," she said. "I know. He said you didn't answer him. I never do when it concerns you." She rose and crossed the room, stopping an arm's length away. "You never ask me what I want." He looked down at her, tired but steady. "Because I'm afraid of the answer. I want to stay." He exhaled, almost a laugh. "You're still learning how dangerous that is." "I know enough." He reached into his coat and drew out a folded paper. "This was delivered for you." She took it carefully. The seal was unfamiliar. Two crossed reeds beneath a crescent. It's from a woman in the city, he said. Her name is Nada. She remembers your mother. There was a boarding house. She says she has something that belongs to you. Anneliese stared at the seal. I never told anyone about the boarding house. You mentioned it once. In Vienna. I remembered. She didn't speak for a long moment. He stepped closer, close enough that his voice dropped. I'll go with you. When you're ready. She felt the weight of the letter in her hand and the steadiness of his presence beside her. Then she said, Tomorrow. He nodded. We'll take the narrow road. The one along the river. She looked up at him, and for the first time since her name had changed, said, Thank you, Yvain, for not asking me to become someone else. His hand brushed hers. You already became what I never knew I needed. They stood like that until the fire in the hearth guttered low and the library settled into silence again, the kind that only exists between two people who have already chosen each other. The carriage rolled slowly along the Miljacka River, its wheels dampened by the softened snow and gravel beneath. Anneliese kept the letter folded inside her glove, the paper still faintly scented with burnished tobacco. They passed stone houses with chipped shutters and eaves hung with icicles, the city quieter than usual for a market day. Yvain sat across from her, watching the landscape with a gaze that flicked off into her face. His coat was buttoned to the throat, and a new scar, barely healed, curved beneath his ear. She said she remembers my mother. Anneliese said, her voice low. Not a Mulek. Her name appeared in the shelter ledgers from that year. You searched them? I asked the steward too. Quietly. She didn't answer. The city fell away behind them, and the hills rose gently, dotted with cypress and the occasional roof swallowed by vines. The house, when they reached it, was unassuming whitewashed, two windows shuttered against the chill, a blue door weathered by smoke and sun. Yvain stepped out first and offered his hand. She took it. The air smelled of cold loam and dried fennel. A woman opened the door before they knocked. Her hair was wrapped in indigo cloth, and her eyes were the same deep brown as Anneliese's, though older, weighed differently. You're late, she said without preamble. The tea's gone bitter. Inside, the walls were lined with old maps and a hanging rug stitched with pomegranates. A cat slept on the hearth. Nada poured tea into mismatched cups, and Anneliese sat without removing her gloves. She was thin when she arrived, Nada said, settling opposite. Your mother. She carried a book of psalms in French and refused to speak anything else, even when the baker cheated her. But she sang to you in German. I remember that. Anneliese stared at the steam rising from her cup. She left in spring. Said she had family in Vienna. She gave me this. Nada rose and returned with a box the size of a bread loaf, wrapped in a faded linen kerchief. I never opened it, she said. Didn't seem mine to open. Anneliese unfolded the cloth. Inside lay a child's dress, finely stitched with a hem mended 3 times. Beneath it, a single photograph, creased at the corners. Her mother, seated on a balcony, holding a baby against her chest. Her face was turned, but the profile was unmistakable. Yvain remained silent. I tucked it away because I thought someone would return, Nada said. But no one ever did. She died, Anneliese said. In Vienna. I suspected, Nada said gently. The way women vanish from records and reappear only in memory. Anneliese traced the edge of the photograph. You have her mouth, Nada said. And her stubbornness, clearly. She looked up. I don't know what to do with this. You do, Nada said. But it may take time to admit it. They left just before dusk. Anneliese carried the box in her lap, the photograph tucked between her fingers. She was alone, she said as the carriage turned back toward the city. She never told me about this place. You were a child, Yvain said. She was trying to survive. Why did you find her? Because I wanted to understand the girl who would follow me to Sarajevo with nothing but a false name and a steady gaze. She turned toward the window, but her voice was steady. I haven't asked what this has cost you. You will. And you'll answer? When you're ready to hear it. They rode the rest of the way without words. When the carriage stopped before the rear gate of the palace, she didn't move. Come with me, she said softly. He hesitated. You know what that implies. I do. She stepped down, the box still pressed to her side. He followed her through the eastern wing, past the closed shutters, and the long corridor hung with Ottoman calligraphy. Her chambers were modest, appointed for a visiting niece. Not a fiancé, but the fire had been lit, and the basin still steamed from the maid's visit. She placed the box on the table without opening it. "You've stood beside me in rooms where I didn't belong," she said, unpinning the brooch from her collar, "and never once asked me to disguise who I was inside them." He crossed to her slowly, his gloves already removed. "I never needed to," he said. "You were already more than I deserved." She looked up at him, her jaw set. "You said your mother was born outside nobility. She died still feeling outside of it. Do you think I will?" "No," he said, "because you won't be standing alone." She reached for him, and this time, when their hands met, neither pulled away. The fire crackled behind them, and outside, the city bells announced the turning hour. Neither of them moved until the last chime faded.